Ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah, the guy who's on the far right, right?
good afternoon.
No, he's sitting on the far right.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Bilal Wahab. I am the Wagner Fellow here at the Washington Institute, and I'm very happy to welcome you to the Washington Institute to this very timely and important event with with a panel of stars and experts on three very important countries to the stability of the Middle East: Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Recently, as you know, January 3rd to be precise, a U.S. drone killed IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani. Qasem Soleimani was described as the hands-on commander who exercised detailed command and control over the various pro-Iran militias in these three countries. Not always, by desire or to their liking. So him being removed, to quote Secretary Pompeo, removed from the battlefield, may have impacts on the operations of these militias, but also the stability or lack thereof in these countries. So today we're looking at, broadly speaking, the value of leadership, particularly the leadership of Qasem Soleimani and the meaning of him not being in the picture anymore. Perhaps also look at the nexus that his presence and now his end brings to the links and the nexus among these three countries and these groups, and perhaps also look at the question of what happens when such important, charismatic, influential leadership is no longer present. Joining me on this panel are, to my immediate left, Dr. Michael Knights. He's a senior fellow here at the Washington Institute. He has been since 2003 conducting extensive on-the-ground research in Iraq, and increasingly on Yemen and whatever duty calls. So definitely an expert on unconventional warfare and all of that fun stuff that militias around the Middle East do. To his left is my colleague here, Philip Smythe. He's our Sora Fellow here and the curator of a very interesting interactive map that charts the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. I invite you to check it out. There is also a video accompanying that that identifies where which group operates and tracks that. So it's a continuously updated interactive map, quite useful and informative research tool. And last but not least is also my colleague Haneen Ghaddar, the ultimate Lebanon expert. She's our Friedman visiting fellow here. And previously she worked as a journalist, the managing editor of Lebanon's Now news site. And she's appeared in the top tier publications and also gave testimonies at The Hill. We have three countries, one figure, and a few issues that bring together the nexus of these three countries. So I'm going to start with Mike here. If you could, Mike, give us the big picture. Tell us who Qasem Soleimani was. Just remind us of that figure, his weight, his significance in Iraq, but perhaps also to Iran and regionally speaking, and then perhaps digging deeper into Iraq and what does his removal mean for Iraqi security, but also for Iran's political leverage and influence in Iraq. And if you could also comment on the other person that was killed with Qasem Soleimani, Abu al-Mahdi al-Muhandis, who was Qasem Soleimani's point person in Iraq, who was also killed in the same strike. So what does, again, the removal of Qasem Soleimani mean for Iraq, its stability, the trajectory where it's going, having in mind that in addition to the role of militias, there is also a protest movement, a pro-democracy, pro-reform protest movement that have started since October 1st. So big influential leader has been taken out of the picture. an Iranian one, but also an Iraqi one, but the stakes remain big. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so Qasem Soleimani was the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Qods Force, which was the sort of special forces and paramilitary operations wing of the Revolutionary Guard. He had a very special place within the regime in Iran, and you can see some of that laid out in a variety of publications we put out since January the 3rd, including one where we were thinking early last year about what would be the impact if he were removed from the scene. An unpublished paper from our Succession series, unpublished but widely read within this town. Qasem Soleimani had a unique closeness to the supreme leader, akin to sometimes an adopted son status, at least held up as a paragon of the Revolutionary Guard virtues, and there was a lot of hope invested in him in terms of keeping Iran expanding and growing in strength within the region. He was a dynamic player. He was able to make things happen. He not only had the backing, but he also had the creativity and the intelligence to come up with ideas and then execute them. He was also able to pull many different elements of the Islamic Republic's security architecture under his control and sort of bend them to his operational needs. And, he's a very hard figure to replace. One of the places he had the deepest contacts was in Iraq, where he had cultivated an Iraqi deputy, in essence, Abu Mahdi al-Mohandis, a US designated terrorist since 2009. Both of those guys died on January the 3rd. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how disruptive that is to the militia scene inside Iraq, how positive it is for the political scene in Iraq, that they not only should individually exit the scene, but do so at the same time. A lot of the things I'm going to be talking about are dealt with in more depth in a new West Point Combating Terrorism Sentinel piece that came out just a few days ago on the death of Soleimani and Mohandis and what it means for militias in Iraq. It's called Soleimani is Dead, not my title, but really the point should be Soleimani and Mohandis are dead together. So that piece talks briefly about how, essentially by late September, we had the apex of Revolutionary Guard Qods Force influence in Iraq, of Lebanese Hezbollah access to fundraising opportunities in Iraq, a slice of every major new deal within the country that didn't involve international or Western companies, and also the apex, the zenith of Hezbollah controlling the country, Abu Mahdi al-Mohandis being the founder of Hezbollah, one of the largest militias. As we wrote, by September, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had essentially won in Iraq. They'd won everything: political dominance, economic dominance, military dominance. By that point, Mohandis was the fully empowered Iranian military governor of Iraq, with Qasem Soleimani standing behind him and with an unrivaled set of militia relationships within the country. At that point, people often talk about Iranian unconventional warfare in Iraq, but they weren't doing unconventional warfare by September 2019. They were doing what's called foreign internal defense, which means they're not trying to destabilize something or take over something. They have something. They're trying to defend it against it being taken over by something else, whether that be demonstrators, democratic elections, security sector reform, or positive foreign influences. Now, the moment the militias under Mohandis got control of the Iraqi state, they faced their first foreign internal defense challenge, the protests, and they completely flunked them. And that started a sequence of events that eventually ended in January the 3rd. We saw the militias stumble, Mohandis and Soleimani stumble through protests, decide to take on the US in a more lethal way, get hit very hard on December 29th when 25 Qatar Hezbollah were killed for one, in exchange for one US contractor killed. And then on January the 3rd, we killed both Soleimani and Mohandes, and we tried to kill another Rev Guard Quds Force commander in Yemen, and probably another one in Syria, I imagine. This, from my perspective, has kicked off a much more aggressive US government effort, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. This is the endogenous shock that a lot of people in US government were talking about having to deliver at some point in the near future because we were facing defeat in Iraq. I would call it a splash of cold water to the face. Others called it an endogenous shock. I've called it a momentum breaker. That's what we delivered on January the 3rd. It's opened up a lot of political space in Iraq, particularly for the appointment of a better prime minister, potentially. And we're going to know if that's worked or not within the next week. It's also opened up a Pandora's box of competition between the various militia actors within the popular mobilization forces and resistance, non-PMF resistance factions or elements, wings, split off parts of the same movements, some that focus on resistance in Syria, others that are within the PMF, and so on. There was a process of consolidation happening as we write in, we had another piece out in CTC Sentinel in August 2019, which talked about exactly how the PMF was arranged on the ground, how it was structured, and what was the factional makeup, not just of individual areas of operation, but also of the line functions of it: finance, religious affairs, propaganda, operations, training, command and control, etc. And, ultimately, Mohandes, backed by Qasem Soleimani, was consolidating control of the main functional arms of the popular mobilization forces. The enablers, like the missiles, the artillery, the anti-tank systems, the drones, but also things like the Central Security Division, the internal discipline mechanism. And as we know from all of us watching Middle Eastern regimes, who's the most powerful person in the regime? It's the person who's able to arrest anyone else in the regime, who's empowered to do that. That guy was called Abu Zainab al-Lami. And it was notable that Abu Zainab and many of the other key functional commanders came from Qatar Hezbollah, the movement that Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes had formed. So Qatar Hezbollah, the closest proxy to the Revolutionary Guard Quds Force, was in charge of the key functional parts of the PMF, and from my perspective, it was beginning to cannibalize and slowly eat alive its former parent movement, the Badr organization, which is where Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes came out of originally. And when he came back into Iraq and he got super empowered by Qasem Soleimani, he basically started to suck the life out of and convert over elements of his old movement, Badr, which is nominally led by Hadi al-Amri, but Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes was eating his lunch every day for the last couple of years, slowly taking this movement over. So this hostile takeover was coming under a much smarter Revolutionary Guard-backed leader very close to Qasem Soleimani. But that entire project was brought to a halt on January the 3rd. The Iranian Rev Guard and the PMF had become overinvested in two individuals. Those individuals are very capable, and I don't think there are that many very capable individuals within either the Qods Force system or the Rev Guard or the PMF in comparison to Soleimani and Mohandes. There weren't many of that quality, and as a result, as always happens with performance punishment, any of us have experienced this. You do a good job, more and more tasks attached to you. You also, if you're a workaholic, more and more tasks attached to you. So, what's happened since they've been removed? Well, first of all, we've seen this kind of splintering of cohesion within the PMF. Everyone is going to be competing to get resources, areas of operation, functional line departments underneath them. The consolidation process was not something a lot of these militia leaders wanted. It was something that they couldn't stop happening because Mohandes was not just intelligent and ruthless, but exceptionally well backed by Qasem Soleimani, who was very well backed by the supreme leader. So this was an irresistible center of gravity, like a black hole that was just sucking everything in and squashing it. They don't have that anymore. That black hole's gone now. So the whole constellation can now act in a different way. In Badr, we'll see Hadi al-Amri's remaining part of Badr, still competing with the other part of Badr that was previously backed by Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes. What are the Rev Guard Qods Force going to do? Are they going to start to directly administer certain things in Iraq, like, let's say, Sunni tribal auxilia? You can see the Rev Guard Qods Force ambassador, the ambassador in Iraq is Masjidi, is a former Qods Force guy. He's been going out and speaking to Sunni provincial governors for ages, doing this kind of stuff. What if he takes that part of the portfolio and Qods Force runs some of those Sunni politicians and militias directly? What if Badr goes into the Kurdistan control line areas and starts to take back control of some of the Shia Turkoman Badr units that over time Mohandes was basically peeling away from Amri's Badr? What if Hadi al-Amri's area of control in Diyala province starts to expand out again, where it was before being sort of contracted and pushed back into his own native Diyala province? What will Hezbollah do? They don't have their figurehead now. They're probably going to keep control of western Iraq, of the Syrian border. They're probably going to try and keep control of the functional elements that they have right now within the PMF. But a new era is coming, and we need to know a lot more about Hezbollah, because that organisation is probably going to go leaderless in public. It's probably going to have, it's going to continue having a fake spokesman. It's going to try and make itself essentially invisible. So you can't sanction these guys. You can't say whose MPs are Hezbollah MPs, because they're not necessarily going to be calling themselves that. So this organisation needs a lot more focus. Finally, we're going to see where Lebanese Hezbollah goes. Until recently, they had an unparalleled ability to extract money from major business deals in Iraq, both Lebanese Hezbollah and also Amal. And they're not going to want to let go of that. And finally, we're going to see where Muqtada al-Sadr goes. He's made on the January the 24th very strong comments about either completely demobilising the Hashid al-Shabi and folding them into the Ministry of Defence, or at least bringing that organisation under true national command and control. He's, of course, got his own militias. He might or he might not want them to be under national command and control. He might feel like he's going to control the next Prime Minister, so he's quite happy for things to get more centralised on the Prime Minister's office again. Point is, anyway, he's a more powerful player than he was before Soleimani and Mohandes disappeared. He's been liberated, ultimately, by this action. So that's the second time that we've liberated Muqtada al-Sadr. Now, the final thing to make a point of is that this machine is huge and sprawling, and until late September, it was completely and utterly on top and controlled everything, and elements of it are still controlling everything. So it's not going to just disappear, because two guys disappeared, even though I think it's been dealt a grievous blow. Ultimately, these movements out there in the provinces are going to try and hold down their little colonies, which is what they've established. These are transplanted PMF units from the south who now have decided we own Beiji, let's say a strategic Sunni city, or we own this part of central Tigris River Valley or whatever. They're not going to go. Lebanese Hezbollah is not going to try and let go of the fundraising capabilities, and Qods Force is probably going to move to a more pantheon-based approach of multiple different leaders all doing a part of what Soleimani did before, which is ultimately a safer and more diversified way to operate, because it makes it difficult to be completely decapitated like they were on January the 3rd. One of the final comments in that CTC Sentinel piece is that conscious and sustained effort by rival forces will be needed to do further irreparable damage to Iran-backed militias in Iraq. And there are many people in this town right now and other places who will be vigorously supporting this conscious and sustained effort. Right now, the Manhattan Project of targeting processes is underway. whether it be for sanctions or whether it be for kinetics. I'd say I've never seen so much effort put into targeting in great detail how militia networks operate in Iraq, how they're tied into business networks, how they're tied into Lebanese Hezbollah fundraising, oil smuggling, major corruption networks, control of ports, control of land borders, human rights abuses, and politics, election rigging. It's great that there's so much focus on this at the moment because it's going to be, we're at the beginning of a campaign, and I think we're going to prosecute it in the manner of a multi-year campaign.
That was both nerdy and quite insightful of the big picture. Not everyone can do that. Thank you, Mike. I have some follow-up questions for you, but maybe I'll come back to it, especially on Muqtada and also how this is going to impact the protest movement. But let's segue to Syria and to Philip Smythe, and I see that we're gonna give you a taste of that map that I was referring to earlier. Philip, Qasem Soleimani organized and coordinated many of the militias that operate in Syria. And perhaps what's interesting about Syria is there are some local militias that Qasem Soleimani used to control and nudge. But there are also Lebanese Hezbollah as well as Iraqi militias that were operating inside Syria. Again, that takes lots of acumen. Yes. Who else can do that? How have these militias been dealing with the absence of Qasem Soleimani? And you could also comment on what does the removal of Qasem Soleimani mean to Iran's ability to shape events in Syria, especially since Turkey and Russia have become more active players.
Okay. So I guess going after Soleimani, we can look at this in a few different ways. He was always the most major figurehead for any of the Shia militia groups that were there. He was the kind of guy who would stop everything he was doing to take pictures with any local commander. There's a running joke about this that anybody he was taking a picture with would end up dead because a lot of them would be on the martyrdom profiles with this great picture of them taking a selfie with Soleimani. But that's kind of the hands-on approach that he had with many of the local leaders. But I don't want to get too trapped in who Soleimani was as a singular individual. A lot of his skill came down to who he delegated a lot of these affairs to and how well he could play some groups off of other groups, and then also in terms of how well he could solidify Iran's control within Syria. Immediately following his killing outside of Baghdad airport, there was some in the kind of Arabic press that would say this, that would say, the Russians are now going to come in and try to take over these groups that the Iranians have created. There's going to be more tensions. I haven't seen any of that. In fact, I think it's quite overblown in media right now about this tension that's going on between the Iranians and the Russians. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean there isn't competition. But what Soleimani was able to do on the ground was to put local commanders, people who would be loyal, people who would fight well, and also people who had the loyalty of the groups that they were driving from, to kind of get the operation done. Now, the other thing is when we're talking about nexus of kind of Iranian strategy in the region, Syria is it. Syria is this hub. You have almost the entire Iranian, essentially foreign legion that's fighting there. But something odd over the recent past couple of years is that we haven't really been hearing much about it. It's not that Syria isn't an interesting story, but I think the biggest push for the Iranians, and they were very public about this, and now they've also kind of dropped down a bit in terms of their public announcements about what they're doing in Syria, was during the Battle of Aleppo. Battle of Aleppo, you had tens of thousands of Iraqi fighters from multiple factions, at least 23 factions that they were controlling and recruiting from. You then had Afghan Shia, who were part of what's now called Lashkar Fatimiyun. You had Liwa Zainabiyun, which were Pakistani Shia that were placed out there. But you had all these different little factions moving around within this larger piece of IRGC machinery. They were all listening to IRGC instructions. The Lebanese Hezbollah guys there, who they would sometimes task with giving an overarching control over some of these other groups, or at least cooperating with them, they also participated in this. And they were also sometimes tasked with doing more. Hey, why don't you guys partner up with somebody from Fatimiyun, and then you can partner up with a local Syrian group and build that up. So they understand what it's like to be part of this army of the Imamate, as they would sometimes call it, this Quwwat al-Haydariyya, this force for Haydar. So these are kind of the lines that were used, but also it worked in practice. They actually wished to create, and I know there's been a lot written on this over the past couple of years, but this kind of grand Shia army, where you could have a multitude of different people from different countries that were all trained by kind of Mama Iran, and you would come back to them, you'd listen to their instructions, and they would get done what you needed to get done. I haven't seen a change in that either within Syria. Now, you may see some of this in Iraq where there were certain groups competing, but because you have such a marked foreign influence within Syria. So, for instance, you have a multitude of Iraqi factions that are still stationed there. You also have different Syrian factions, which Soleimani himself deliberately created, taking a page out of the Iraq model to say, oh, well, if we have one kind of Hezbollah-style group, well, we can't play them off of each other, and we can't get them to do certain things that we want. He did that with them as well. But then you also have the Afghans. You also have Iranian forces. You even had Artesh, the Iranian army, send people there. You've had a lot of different guys who are in that area. But a lot of this has actually remained pretty cohesive. There was recent reporting, I think it was out of the Telegraph in London, that was talking about how some radio traffic had been intercepted from Lashkar Fatemiyun that was in Idlib. You'll notice that with the campaigns, it's not like in the years past. These are not the major campaigns that actually would have required Soleimani's influence and organizational abilities, or even his same kind of delegation standards. That machinery is already in place and quite effective. In Idlib right now, what you're seeing is there's reports of some Afghans that are fighting up there. There was a Hezbollah commander who was reportedly killed. But what's interesting was one of the Lashkar Fatemiyun commanders came out and said, you know, it doesn't matter if Soleimani's dead. We already have a 5-year plan. I mean, imagine this. The 5-year plan is already there. Now, I'm not going to say that this makes them completely effective, that they're not suffering from any leadership issues. But there's a general line that they are generally following. But I don't really think that should make us sit here and go, well, we've lost Syria. I mean, that's the general narrative, is it not? That we've said, well, Syria's done, who cares? I see opportunities for the United States in different ways there, and I have on my map here, it's interesting, the person who put this map up here, Corey, who's in the back, says it looks like a kaleidoscope that somebody smashed on the floor whenever I do all the different groups and factions, so bear with me here. I hope it's not too crazy.
And this is the same one that's online?
No, this is a different one.
Okay.
This is not the other one with the movements and stuff. I made this specially for you guys. You're welcome. Work with me here. So first, I kind of want to go through some of the major bases that are here that were put in place. And I've only done a few because limited time. But this one out here is the most major one, called the Imam Ali compound. And if we're talking about kind of a major strategic point for the Iranians, this is it. Not only is this on the border of Iraq and Syria, but it has pretty much every major faction that the Iranians really want to use as a foreign expeditionary force. And this also includes Kataib Hezbollah. Kataib Hezbollah has one of the largest barracks on this base. They've been transporting arms and also kind of strategic targeting capabilities for rockets through that base. And it's
Where
also...
is the base?
It's right here.
Right, it's the one right down on the border. Yeah.
Highlighted in white. I hope you can
Got it.
see it. But this base, it's interesting. If we look back, and this is where I'm talking about the American opportunities that can come in. What if we have to respond again to an Iranian advance or an Iranian attack on the U.S.? What if they kill another American? What if they decide they want to turn up the flame? Well, before, when we saw what happened, most of the responses were in Iraq. Although this kind of was missed in a lot of this, a lot of the context, we also hit bases out there for Kataib Hezbollah. Because Kataib Hezbollah is now treating this as like a free-range zone in eastern Syria that, well, they control, that the Iranians control. And I can show you here. So I'm going to do the Iraqi zones of control, the Afghan ones, and then Lebanese and Syrian different Hezbollah groups. When I said it was a kaleidoscope and a ton of colors and a lot of other crazy stuff, you'll notice one thing. They all overlap in that area. They're all fighting together. They're all participating together. But with the American opportunities, what does that say? We don't necessarily need to rouse the anger of Iraqis within Iraq if we have to hit back. And I think we did run that risk earlier on, and Muqtada Sadr took this, and Muqtada Sadr, took it as a way to kind of brand himself as more middle and more middle of the road and more moderate and more nationalistic by saying, well, we don't want American forces in Iraq. Well, why not just hit the bad Iraqi forces in Syria? I mean, this is a thing. If you talk to a lot of Iraqis, and I speak to a lot of militia leaders and other commanders and fighters and stuff, they still treat Syria like it's a different realm. Like it's a totally parallel universe at times. They're not talking about it the same way they did back in 2013 through 2016 or 2017. Now it's oh yeah, well they went out there, they were stationed out there, but that's a different thing. Yeah, they're protecting the borders, but that's more of a bigger Iran project. Well, if we need to hit back in terms of dealing with other average Iraqis, it doesn't look as if we are going out and saying, okay, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter if you're in Iraq, we're just going to hit you anyway. It doesn't rouse as much anger and as much nasty sentiments from what I've generally been able to pick up on. But beyond that, the kind of geostrategic importance of this area for Iran, there's been a lot of conversation about the so-called land bridge. This is the hub of the land bridge. This is where it crosses over into Syria. This is, one of the reasons you can say that American forces may still be in the area to block further solidifying presence of the Iranians to secure their road network, to secure these transport networks. And I mean, when I look at it, I think, okay, you have a large number of bases there. You have domestic recruiting that's going on there. You're doing conversion programs out there to make people Shia. There's a large tribe that the Iranians will try to recruit from pretty much every other day. It makes better sense if you're trying to send a message and put an end to more transnational Iranian activities. I guess something else, and I don't want to get too weedy because I love all my militias, and why not? There's been a bit of a change too. Yeah, you know me. But there's been a bit of a change in terms of how the Iranians do this, and I think it plays very well to what Mike's point was, which was there's different kind of sections of groups that do different things, different tasks. So some of them, one of them is Katab Said al-Shuhada. This is a splinter of Katab Hezbollah, but it's still loyal to the Iranians. You have Harakat al-Abdal, which is another quasi-splinter of the Badr organization. You also have Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba, which is also a splinter of Asayib Ahl al-Haq. What do these groups all have in common? They're all extraordinarily loyal to the Iranians and the IRGC, and they've all been the major recruiters for Syria. These are all new groups. They were created essentially between 2013 and 2015. But what's interesting is you see all of these groups along the border there, and they're the ones who are manning these checkpoints. They're the ones who are manning the bases. They're the ones who are assisting with transporting a lot of this nastier material that may be used against the Israelis at some point. But now they've been formed into a more general kind of umbrella, and they call it Quwat al-Haydariyun. It's a looser network. It's a looser network, but it's interesting that the Iranians are now giving it a broader name. It has been in existence since at least 2015, but you never really saw anything about it. You don't know who the commanders are, but you know the general players that are in there and how they're recruiting. But it's very disjointed, and I think that adds more to your point. The Iranians are looking at this and saying, maybe we don't necessarily need a replacement for the big-time leadership, but we can use the smaller ones, give them some kind of umbrella grouping, and then have them play off of one another. And I think that's the exact model that they've actually perfected within Syria. And now they're actually bringing it back. So it's interesting. They've used multiple models, a Hezbollah model for building the group, you use an Iraqi model for how many groups you want, and now they have a Syrian model for how do you control those groups, and how do you keep them in line, and then how do you make them effective. And that's really been the gist of I guess, their big push.
Thank you. That's actually all fascinating. I'm going to come back to that last point that you made about these different models and probably quiz you more about that. Let me do a commercial break. We're doing another event in a month from today on February 27th, where we look at the supply side, if you wish, of this. We're going to look at how the death of Qasem Soleimani is going to impact Iran and the IRGC, and perhaps also politics inside Tehran. Okay, that was the end of the commercial break. To Haneen, by far, Lebanese Hezbollah is the most institutionally established group of the fellows that we've talked about so far. What does the death of Qasem Soleimani mean to Hezbollah? And if you could also comment on, we've been talking about challenges of leadership, the vacuum. But let me ask a different question in the case of Hezbollah, since they are more institutionally established, both politically and militarily. What does the death of Qasem Soleimani offers Hassan Nasrallah in terms of opportunities? not just challenges,
Yeah.
but opportunities. How does he look around and say, all right, now that the morning is over, here's what I'm going to do?
All right. Thank you. These are two very good questions, and let me start by trying to answer your first question by saying that definitely the death of Qasem Soleimani offers both challenges and opportunities to Hezbollah, but more challenges than opportunities.
Okay.
Let me talk a little bit about the relation between Hezbollah and Hassan Nasrallah per se and other military commanders to Soleimani himself as the leader of the Qods Force. Before 2011, and I say 2011 because it was a crossroad in this relationship, especially when Hezbollah was tasked to go and fight in Syria to defend the Assad regime, but also to help with the logistics when it comes to bringing all these Shia militias in Syria together, and basically what Philip was talking about. Hezbollah has been involved in the region before. This was not the first time that Hezbollah went in the region. They've been in Iraq for many, many years before, and in other parts of the region. But Syria was really in the crossroad because of this relationship. So before 2011, Hezbollah had a much bigger margin of maneuver in terms of not necessarily decision-making, but being considered as the consultant in terms of knowing and understanding the regional dynamics more than anyone else in Iran. So Hezbollah, militarily, the former military commander Imad Maghniyi was the guy, the go-to guy on military issues in Lebanon per se, but also in the region. And Hassan Nasrallah was the political consultant, where he was able to offer sound advice to the leaders in Iran in terms of what should be done and what should not be done when it comes to domestic political affairs. So these two guys were very credible in the Iranian regime, and they had a lot of access to the regime, and also they were able to convince the regime of making these decisions. And that, when Maghniyi was assassinated in Syria, by Israel and the US, he was replaced by Mustafa Badruddin. Mustafa Badruddin was not Imad Maghniyi, but he still, along with Nasrallah, played a major role in terms of offering sound advice. And their advice were taken very seriously in Iran. It doesn't mean that they were able to make any decisions, but they were considered credible when it comes to the domestic politics and military decisions on the ground. And that's basically because they understand not only the language. Speaking the language is not that important because Soleimani spoke Arabic, but they understood the nuances of the culture, of the Arab culture versus the Persian. That thing was very important for them. Like, they understood how the Iraqi mind works. They understood how the Lebanese mind works, the cultural nuances, and so on. Post-2011, 2011 was a big crossroad, but also the death of Mustafa Badruddin, who was allegedly killed by Qasem Soleimani himself because of many disagreements in Syria and mainly in Aleppo. Aleppo was another crossroad. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but what I want to say is that when Mustafa Badruddin was killed, he was not replaced. He replaced Maghniyi, but he was not replaced. He was replaced by 4 junior commanders. And Soleimani started to play the hands-on approach. He was macro-managing these militias, including Hezbollah. Hezbollah still had a bigger role, but their margin of maneuver shrank militarily and politically. And that tells you a lot why Qasem Soleimani, when he was killed, he was actually coming from Beirut, because he was also macro-managing Hezbollah's domestic approach to the protests that are taking place in Lebanon today. He was very much hands-on on every single aspect. So I think when it comes to the death of Soleimani for Hezbollah, it is a challenge. I'll talk about the challenges later, but the only opportunity here is that they feel that today they might be able to regain that margin of maneuver, because no one else can be hands-on or understand how these nuances work. So they feel that now they can actually be more involved in military and political decisions in the region. This is the only opportunity they see, but it is very, very problematic because they also understand how difficult it is. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. There have been some reports recently, post-Soleimani, that Hezbollah is tasked for not necessarily just replacing Soleimani, but with a bigger regional role, especially in Iraq, that they will be more hands-on in Iraq because the successor of Soleimani does not speak Arabic, and the successor of Soleimani does not understand Iraq. He understands Afghanistan, but not Iraq. And who else understands Iraq? It's Hezbollah. So there are a lot of reports saying that they are going to play this bigger role. However, this is very, very problematic. And it's not just only problematic, it's not new. Hezbollah has been involved in these logistics before, so nothing's going to change for them. On the contrary, they have been suffering from lack of resources and people to actually play this role. They have been shrinking their role because of the lack of resources, not because of any decision. So the problem here is that not only Iran lost Soleimani, Hezbollah lost Soleimani as their military commander. So when Badruddin died, he was not replaced. Soleimani replaced Hezbollah's military commandment. He was their guy. So they don't really have anyone as a military commander to go and play this role. They have been depleted in Syria. They have been depleted everywhere else. Badruddin was the last commander. So who else? Very few people think. Some people think that Qasem, Hezbollah's Iraq envoy, if you want, can play this role. But also, this is something that is very controversial. Qassem's role in Iraq also shrank after Soleimani played this bigger role, and there are a lot of sensitivities in Iraq between the Lebanese and the Iraqis. So it's not that simple. Also, Hezbollah lost a lot of elite commanders and officials in Syria. They still have to work on bringing up, and which is going to take many years in order to groom a new commander. And they cannot really jump into Iraq today to do that. They are too thin in terms of deployment and in terms of resources. They have been very much involved in the Shia crescent. And today we have to think about Qasem Soleimani's death as one challenge, but also this coincided with the failure or problematics within the Shia crescent. The Shia crescent was Soleimani's main project, right? This is what he came to the region to do, to link Beirut to Damascus, to Baghdad, to Tehran in one big land corridor, but it's not really a land corridor. It's like an ideological, political, practical project that would allow Iran to project power in the region. That was Qasem Soleimani's main job and main achievement in the region. His death is not going to be an issue for this project, but also this project started to offer challenges before even Soleimani died, right? So this is they're facing two things at the same time: the protests in Iraq and Lebanon, and Iran to a certain extent, and the death of Soleimani. So this is not just the death of Soleimani. This is also the almost death of this Soleimani's project. So this is going to be an issue. So their deployment is going to be too thinned out in terms of facing the protesters and replacing Soleimani. In terms of resources, we also know that Hezbollah has been suffering from its own financial crisis, which they have been trying to compensate by what Mike also talked about, their deals in Iraq and bringing money from the Iraqi businesses. But they have a real issue domestically also in Lebanon, right? So they used, before 2011, again, before the crossroad, they used to cater for the whole Shia community in terms of jobs, resources, social services, you name it. And then after they went into Syria, this circle started shrinking. And after Qusayr battle, they realized that this is not going to be a short fight in Syria, so it shrank to serve and cater for only the Hezbollah community. After Aleppo, it shrank to cater only for the fighters community. And today, they're only catering for the full-time fighters community. The contractuals and the part-timers have been put on hold. So this is what Hezbollah today is really suffering from this. I'm not saying that they don't have money anymore. They're bringing money from Iraq. They're bringing still some money from Iran and from their other projects. However, most of this money is still being used for their projects and the precision missiles, their soft power initiatives in Syria, and some of their people in the region. So this is the most challenging time for Hezbollah. One, because of Soleimani's killing, but also because of the Shia Crescent protests against along the Shia Crescent. The protests in Lebanon are very important because, and that's what Soleimani has been very much involved in the details of cracking down on these protesters. And today, Hezbollah doesn't know how to do that. They are indirectly against Hezbollah. They're not like Iraq, where they are very clearly against Iran and Iran's militia in Iraq. In Lebanon, it's indirect. The protesters are demonstrating against the corruption, and Hezbollah is protecting the network of corrupt politicians. They're protesting against the authorities that have brought Lebanon to the brink of financial and economic collapse, and they are today the authority. For the first time, Hezbollah is the authority. They are struggling with an economy that they cannot fix. They don't know what to do with the next month. In March is the deadline, basically. If Lebanon doesn't get bailed out with $15 billion for a year, then the state will go bankrupt. They don't know what to do with that. They failed to translate their military victories into a socio-economic vision for Lebanon and the Lebanese. And the Lebanese people see that today, that the military victories did not put food on the table. And today the protests are indirectly addressing these issues. More Shia are taking to the streets. The three main Shia cities in Lebanon, Nabati, Sur, and Baalbek, are all witnessing protests. And this has never happened before. It's happened under Hezbollah's umbrella, but never against Hezbollah. So what's Hezbollah's reaction to all of this? And this is my last point. The reaction is going to be more consolidation of power and more work on deterrence. First thing they did is that they formed a government. And this government, for the first time in Lebanon's history, you have 100% Hezbollah and allies government. All of them are Hezbollah's allies. It looks like fresh faces and technocrats, but it was picked meticulously by them. The reports about the regional role and all this talk about Hezbollah playing a bigger regional role, they are going to use it to project power to the international community and say, listen, we have a bigger role in the region. We can guarantee stability if you legitimize this government and bail out Lebanon. But if you don't, we are going to be part of instability in the region, not only in Lebanon, but elsewhere. And then this is the question today. If this government in Lebanon, which is 100% Hezbollah, gets bailed out and Hezbollah will gain legitimacy in Lebanon, it doesn't mean that Hezbollah will be able to maintain stability in the region, because from what I said before, it's basically impossible for them to do more than they are doing or guarantee stability. So in terms of consolidation in power, let's look back. When Imad Maghniyi was assassinated, that was their major loss, right? Soleimani is their second or third, but Imad Maghniyi, when he was assassinated, they did not retaliate at all. They still saying until today that they are going to retaliate. What they did is that they did the May 7, 2008 events. They went internally and overthrew the March 14 government and went to the Doha Accord and came up with this new concept, which is the national unity government, and took control by using their arms for the first time against the Lebanese to consolidate their power in Lebanon. When Imad Maghniyi's son, was assassinated in Syria in 2015, they started a campaign in order to bring their ally, Michel Aoun, to be president, and basically forced a lot of Lebanese to accept that. Again, they consolidated their power in Lebanon. When Qasem Soleimani now is assassinated, they're doing the same thing. They're going internally, holding the fort, consolidate their power in Lebanon. So how they're going to do that? First step happened, form the government. Militarily, they are going to continue on the precision missile project, but to an extent that they do not get to a point where they are going to provoke a war with Israel until they're ready. Now they're not ready because they cannot fund the war, they cannot guarantee reconstruction, and they're worried about the refugees, the Shia refugees. They cannot go anywhere. But eventually, when they're ready, they'll get to that point. Also, militarily, they are going to look more into military and security positions in Lebanon and make sure they have friendly people in, allies in, or subjugate the current ones who are challenging them to accept this position. Economically, they are already preparing for the post-collapse phase. They are storing food and storing goods, collecting everything they can find in the market in Lebanon in order to store it. So the post-collapse they can use, they are the only ones who can actually provide food for the people. They do not have the money, but they're trying to store as much goods as they want. Second thing they're going to do on the economic level is to keep on bringing more dollars from Iraq. They're going to take advantage of the shortage of dollars in Lebanon in order to be the only faction that actually has the dollars. So what we have today is that two networks of money exchangers in Lebanon, the official ones and the non-official ones. The non-official money exchangers are mostly located in Hezbollah's areas, mainly in Dahi. A lot of people are going today to Dahi, Hezbollah's headquarters south of Beirut, and exchange money to dollar, buying dollars, because they are always available and they are at better prices. So they're going to do that in order to be the ones who are in control of the dollars. Two, they're also using the shortage of goods because, as you know, because of the Lebanese crisis, the economic crisis, people cannot transfer foreign currency outside of the Lebanese banks anymore. And in order to import goods, you have to pay in dollars and transfer your dollars, and they cannot do that. So we're having shortages in food and medicine, etc. So they're flooding the market with very cheap, because no taxes, of course, with Iranian goods, especially medicine and medical equipment. So today, the Lebanese market is being flooded with all that. And it's also cheaper. Last but not least, they are going to use also their more power within state institutions in order to increase their smuggling operations across the borders from Lebanon to the region, especially when it comes to drugs and drug production. This is another source of funding that has been very lucrative for Hezbollah. I'm going to end here. There are other things that they're trying to do, but these are the most important ones, and I'd like to discuss details if you have any questions. Thanks.
We definitely get a chance to get into maybe more details in the Q&A. I have a general question for all of you. I'm going to ask it, but please don't answer me because I really want to go to the audience and their questions, but maybe you can integrate it in your answers to the attendance question. The question that I have is, I mean, you all offered, excellent detailed analysis of what the title of our topic, of our subject today, what does the killing of Qasem Soleimani mean to these three countries, but also, you clearly delineated the nexus among these three countries. But if you could also comment perhaps later on what does it mean for U.S. policy in these three countries. But perhaps you can get an opportunity to answer that particular policy question while I get a couple of audience questions. So please wait for your mic. Raise your hand, I'll acknowledge you. Wait for the mic, introduce yourself, and please ask one question. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Bilal. Barbara Slavin from the Atlantic Council. I guess, Mike, this is for you. I'm not an Iraq expert, you are, but we've seen the Iraqi parliament vote to send the Americans out. We have had a kind of testy exchange between the State Department and the Iraqis suggesting that we won't leave if told. But I'm trying to understand how the U.S. maintains a robust military and diplomatic and economic presence in Iraq, given the tensions since Soleimani was killed, and especially since Muqtada seems to have flipped to the side telling the U.S. to leave. So how do we stay, and how do we accomplish any of these ambitious goals? I mean, it still looks like the Iranians are winning there. Thanks.
Thank you, Barbara. Mike?
All right, so On a point of detail, of course, first, the Jan 5th session of Parliament didn't have quorum, and they held it anyway. So, you see there that the militias were not to be denied a press conference, essentially, glorified press conference, but, they didn't actually push through anything, including even a non-binding motion. But when it comes to Muqtada also, he didn't flip anywhere. I mean, he's always wanted us gone. And, as I just put out a piece yesterday about this, when you actually, there's what they say in public, which is that foreign forces have to be removed from Iraq. And that's normal for any country, not to want an open-ended foreign military presence. Who wants that? Nobody. But when you ask them what that actually means, does that mean trainers? Does that mean guys who never leave the base? They're like, oh, no. Of course they can stay. The trainers can stay, yeah. And, those guys are helping us. And, it's interesting the changes that have gone on even within that movement. So, Muqtada, for his own political reasons, needs and wants to be the figurehead for this removal of foreign forces. And he certainly does want there to be a significant change in the level of visibility and involvement probably in combat operations. But that's what we want too. We don't want to be, as one US government official said to me the other day, we're not going to, continue mowing the grass for them forever. And, that's how it, the longer we stay, honestly, the less they're trying to improve their military capabilities to actually do counterinsurgency on the ground. So, we need there to be a change in the way coalition and Iraqi, security cooperation is done. We want that. They want that. And, that can happen, I think, within a pretty civil conversation once we put a bit of distance and time between ourselves and the events of January the 3rd and other stuff since regarding our embassy. I think there's a middle ground to be struck there, and I suspect that Saddurist elements will be integral in making that middle ground solution come forward. The situation in Iraq is not good, but it wasn't good last summer, last autumn, the day before Soleimani and Mohandes were killed. What's different now is that you don't have the same level of overwhelming enemy activity dominating the system up till the very highest level. Now you have a disrupted enemy system that has given a number of political actors inside Iraq a chance to speak for Iraq, whether they be demonstrators, whether they be political factions, whether they be elements of the national fabric that are not within the Shiite bloc, who are Iraqis, who still matter. And that's what's changed. I actually think that's a more positive place for things to be than where they were. Before we had, there was literally no hope. This place was just spiraling down to being a pariah state, under sanctions, and with no sovereign agency whatsoever. Run by militias, every single industry, every single security force, every single government agency falling prey one after the other to ever more negative militia influence. Now at least there's some sunshine, around the edges of the cloud, and things are back in play again.
Thanks. Yes, sir.
Humphrey, an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. The footprint of Iran grows with these various Shia militias, and I'm looking at the long term in Syria. We watch the Russian troops consolidate back to Tartus and Latakia. What is the vision for the bases being created, growing by the Shia serving Iran? Is Iran going to establish a Latakia type presence? Will Bashar al-Assad be happy with that? Or at some point does he get nervous that his attempt to take back his country is blocked by his Iranian allies, who he would like to say, thanks for helping me, but it's time to go home, and they don't go home?
Smythe?
To give you a quick and sad answer to this, I don't really think Assad, one, has the force able to dislodge the Iranians. Two, strategically speaking, the Iranians look at Syria as their grand strategic prize in the region, so they're not going to want to leave. But the construction of the bases, I mean, there's a few lines to this. Yes, there are geostrategic imperatives that they wish to follow up on. They want to get missiles that they can aim at the Israelis. They want to solidify control over this large swath of territory. And there's also ideological goals as well. That's really what's guiding this. It's also why they've been building out all these Imam Khamenei centers in on that area on the map that I was showing earlier. They are doing this for the long haul. I am extremely skeptical that Bashar al-Assad can or will push them back. And I mean, with the Russians too, I'm not saying there aren't incidents, and I'm also not saying that there isn't tension. I'm also saying that it's not, it's impossible for the United States to kind of not be able to utilize it or manipulate it in their own way, but it's minuscule. The condominium arrangement that the Russians and the Iranians have for the region, that's pretty good. They are not messing around with it. That's, I guess, part one. Part two to it is, what interest would Russia have in doing that? Really. Okay, they've backed up Bashar al-Assad, and they've also kind of excluded another ally that they're building. But the Iranians, from the start, have made no illusions about what they actually want in Syria. They want to push this concept of the Muqawama al-Islamiyya, the Islamic resistance. They want to push kind of the growth of their little Hezbollah-style groups. They want to push their ideology of absolute wilayat al-faqih. All of it's there, and they've never hidden it. And the Assad people really haven't done all that much to push back against it.
Vladimir.
I have a question for Philip Smith. My name is Vladimir Vilgenberg. We've seen, this is again a nerdy question about Abu Kamal. Have you seen that after the killing of Qasem Soleimani, that you have seen like sort of, like defections from Sunni Arabs that joined Iranian-backed militias in Abu Kamal? And do you think like this killing of Qasem Soleimani will maybe cause like a lot of problems for the Iranians, especially in Deir ez-Zor? We have like a lot of Sunni Arabs that were for salaries joined Iranian-backed militias. Thank you.
Sure. So I guess main group, and you should know this being you were actually out there for how long, but main group out there was an Iranian creation, kind of a Hezbollah copy under Hezbollah command called Liwa al-Imam al-Bakr, or the Bakr Brigades. And they had been pulling in a lot of Sunni tribesmen, paying them a lot of money, also giving them conversion classes if they were open to it, and trying to pay them money on that one. I haven't seen too much evidence that you're getting large numbers of them splitting off. They are very, very well integrated into the setup that's been built. I mean, and this has also been the case since, I want to say, around 2016, 2017. The Iranians have really put out a massive effort, and it's weird because they've almost copied what we did in Iraq. They copied a lot of the success stories and said, all right, hey, we're going to do something extra for you. You want to go out to Qom? You want to have a free trip? You want to do something else? We can facilitate that. And it's won over a good number of the tribal leaders there. Now, whether they're the most effective suppliers of fighters all the time, sometimes they try to get away with it and get their payments. But that's kind of how the tribes work. But beyond that, I'm not going to say that doesn't leave open some space to competition. So if the SDF kind of came in there and said, hey, we might have, especially for the Baghara tribesmen, we might have a better deal for you. We might give you a little bit more autonomy than what the Iranians do. Maybe we have more money. Maybe we can give you more influence somewhere else. I don't see that as, Iranian presence as a complete blocker to a lot of these tribes, possibly flipping later if it's more advantageous for them. But in terms of post-Soleimani, I guess people splitting off, not really. I mean, when you look at this, when I was saying before, it's the true hub of Iran's project in the Middle East. They've made sure to put the most loyal groups there, some of the most loyal junior commanders, most loyal senior commanders. So if you lose a big player like Soleimani, it's not going to be that much of a hit.
Yes, sir. The middle.
My name is Harry Bethke. I'm a desk officer at State Department. Mr. Knights, you alluded a little earlier to sort of Muqtada al-Sadr's mercurial nature and how he's sort of stepped into the fore since the death of Qasem Soleimani. He appears to be sort of positioning himself to be the new face of of resistance. The U.S. in fact, he called it the resistance, and staged this million-man march pretty recently. What do you think his end play is? Is he just looking to increase his profile in Iraqi politics? Is he looking to step into Mohandis's role as viceroy in Iraq, or is there some other effort that is underway?
Yeah, and I'm sure a couple of us are going to jump in on this. Look, I can't guess what's in his mind, because by the time I finish guessing, something else will be in his mind. And you can see that there's a definite attempt to demonstrate, or there was an effort, at least, to demonstrate tremendous power over the last week. And it partially succeeded, but not fully. In some ways, it faced backlash. It faced backlash in terms of he got annoyed at the protesters. He uncovered their sites and allowed them to be burned, and new sites sprang up, and people came and refreshed those protest sites. That was not something that he anticipated. He thought he was going to leave demonstrators not under his control bowed and broken, but that wasn't how it worked out. Likewise, he issued orders that, foreign presence was not to be attacked, and that resistance shouldn't be, executed immediately. It was sort of last resort. And then someone goes and dumps a load of projectiles right in the middle of the U.S. Embassy. So, you can see that he gets immediate pushback on efforts to become the first among equals in the militia scene. His own movement is somewhat fractured in two ways. There's elements that can drift off towards the Iranian camp, and right now I'm sure there are suitcases of money being handed around inside Baghdad by certain sanctioned US individuals to try and buy away individual Sadrists and small blocks of them if the prime ministerial nomination comes to some kind of if some kind of vote is actually required, a competitive vote. But at the same time, there's also another side of his movement, which is overlapping with the civilian protesters. A lot of these young kids, they're from Sadrist families, or they are Sadrists, or they're the families of young Sadrists who were killed in Sadr City in early October. And there's been the ongoing kind of, what happens with demonstrations. You kill one person, there's people come out to demonstrate about that killing, you kill some more people, it keeps rolling. So, Sadr's movement, it's not very easy for him to control it, and he frequently doesn't give enough attention to low-level dynamics within his own movement, and his movement has a lot of its own ideas. So, I don't think he's fully in control, and, ultimately he will opportunistically try and jump into Mohandis's shoes, but nobody's going to jump into Mohandis's shoes. No one person. It's just a splintering of the scene is what we're likely to see.
Haneen, let me ask you to actually chime in on this, because I think there's a friendship between Muqtada and Hassan Nasrallah, aren't they?
Yeah.
What do you think these two gentlemen are learning from each other?
Learning from each other. How to fill the gaps, I think. Okay. They know how to fill the gaps, both of them. They know how to turn a loss into an opportunity. And I think Muqtada Sadr today in Iraq is doing what Hassan Nasrallah did in Lebanon, after every time they suffered a loss or a backlash. I don't think that they will be working closely together because of all the sensitivities between the Iraqi versus Lebanese relationship. They're their allies, but they're going to be allies like Nabih Berri in Lebanon is an ally with Hezbollah. They're like frenemies in a way. So they will learn. They know how to function the same way. They know how to fill the gaps and use opportunities. But there will be a very interesting relation growing in case Muqtada Sadr becomes that kind of the Hassan Nasrallah of Iraq. I'm not sure this is going to be the case, but in case they're going to be interesting because the competition also will play.
That phrase that you use, Hassan Nasrallah of Iraq, I think that is what many Iraqis see Muqtada al-Sadr ultimately aspiring to be. Okay, let's see. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah. to Mark.
Hey, Bilal, I'm Mark Kimmett.
Hey, Mark.
Really, I don't know if this is to Michael or to anybody else on the panel, but what has been the role, or what should be the role of Najaf? Najaf, in many ways, helped create these militias, but doesn't seem to be taking a lot of effort to now try to change the roles of the militias inside the country.
All right, so
Excellent question.
you would be better answering, honestly, than probably any of us. But look, I'm definitely not going to get into giving advice on that front, right? Because I'm not an Najaf following guy. But at moments like this, every Friday we're working on a Friday to Friday cycle in Iraq. Waiting for what's going to get said. It was very critical from October through to December. Now we're at the point where we're on the edge of a new prime ministerial nomination, and you basically got to decide: do you want to have a religious establishment that tells people what politics, how politics is going to end up? Because I don't like that in Iran. But at moments like this, I'm almost begging for it in Iraq, because the guy in charge there, the senior cleric Sistani, I would think is a very positive force, and we don't know how much longer we're going to have him. I'd love him to be more forceful right now, but that's not his way, and that's probably very sensible to be like that. Ultimately, whether it's foreign forces, whether it's Sistani, whether it's the Iranians, we're all waiting to see what Iraqis do. We can push, we can prod, hope, but ultimately, this is going to come down to 5 or 6 Shia leaders in a room in the next 48 hours. And that will set the tone for maybe years to come. We get a decentish prime minister, it could turn a lot of things around in combination with the 2 figures taken off of the table on January the 3rd. Or we could just go back to same old, and it's not going to end up looking that much different than it was in October when the protests started, or on January the 3rd when those guys got killed. The cycle's going to just start again. So I'm hopeful, but you can't put your money on Sistani, because that's not the game he's in, directing where this should go.
Hani?
I'd like to add one small thing about the Shia connection here. And Sistani might not be, or Najaf in general, might not be that assertive when it comes to domestic Iraqi politics and Shia militias. However, there's something going on that I think is more interesting to some extent, which is rebuilding the Iraqi-Lebanese Shia relationships, in the sense that there are a lot of Najafi Shia clerics in Lebanon that have been oppressed or marginalized by Hezbollah over the years. They have been speaking out a little bit more recently, but especially when the protests in both countries broke out and the protests in the Shia towns in Lebanon also happened, they have been speaking out more. There are the connections and the relation between the Lebanese Shia and the Iraqi Shia. The way I'm seeing it, it's becoming interesting and stronger. There might not be anything to it yet, but it's something that can offer something for future relations and future opportunities in terms of Hezbollah's power in Lebanon, especially within the Shia community.
Excellent question, Mark. I'll step out of my role as a moderator and just offer a few additional remarks to what Mike and Haneen have said. I think Grand Ayatollah Sistani ultimately watches out for the role of Marja'iyya, the nature of the establishment, the respect for the institution. I think he is deeply disappointed in the corruption and utter malfunction of Shia rule in Iraq since 2003. And he is also worried that, in the absence of reform, perhaps there might be a revolution against the whole system that currently favors the dominance of Iraq's Shia majority in power. But he also specifically doesn't want to be a supreme leader. He doesn't want to be wilayat al-faqih. So then these are the two goals that he has. Then he has to operate within those two extremes, because if he's wilayat al-faqih, then he can issue orders about what exactly should happen. He doesn't want to do that. But then on the other hand, he is dealing with a bunch of very corrupt, very inefficient Iraqi leaders who, since 2018, the political parties have almost vanished and disappeared in favor of militia leaders who are now in power. I mean, imagine people like Muqtada or Qais al-Khazali and others. Like, what kind of attention do they pay to Grand Ayatollah Sistani? But nonetheless, Grand Ayatollah Sistani's, there's also a question of accountability. The government is basically accountable to whoever puts them in power, and that's how Iran exerts leverage. But the legitimacy and the standing of Grand Ayatollah Sistani comes from the people. It doesn't come from the government, doesn't come from oil money. He doesn't owe his stature to any particular dynamic other than the public. That's why you see even his position on the protest movement has evolved. In the first few weeks, he was actually quite supportive of the government. He was asking the government to, be more lenient, offer reforms, provide more jobs. But as the government became more brutal in cracking down on the protests, his credibility was in line, and then he switched side to support the protesters and their demands, even providing them with the legitimacy, putting legitimacy blanket on their demands of new elections, new election law, new electoral commission, and ultimately calling Adel Abdul Mahdi to resign, because without him doing that, I think his own standing would have been in tatters. But he's an old man, and he wants to leave behind a legacy. And I think that is the real challenge for the future of Iraq. And someone like Muqtada al-Sadr, among the opportunities that he's looking at is for him to be the political leader and as well as the populist leader. And he's at the same time, while he's trying to maneuver through this very complex situation in Iraq, he's at the same time solidifying the legacy of Iraqi Grand Ayatollah to make sure that it won't become a wilayat al-faqih, which is what these militia leaders, the likes of Muqtada, of Qais al-Khazali and others, actually is more appealing to. Someone like Muqtada would love to see to be the not the Grand Ayatollah as much as the supreme leader of Iraq.
Can I ask you one thing? From what you can detect, how much will Grand Ayatollah Sistani commit to the issue of early elections? How much do you think he's going to continue mentioning, pushing, prodding that? Obviously, when it comes to picking a prime minister, that's not something you can
he won't do
be
that.
too specific about. But when it comes to having early, free and fair elections, that is something you could be pretty specific about without picking a side. Do you think he'll keep pushing hard?
I think that's tied to how active and lively the protest movement is. And that is why, as you mentioned, the minute that the security forces started hitting them and burning their tents in Baghdad and elsewhere, they had to come back on the street the next day. This is after Muqtada al-Sadr withdrew his support from the protest movement. They had to get back on the street because they know if they're not on the street, Grand Ayatollah Sistani's support for them, and then by extension their demands, won't be there. So I think, to answer it briefly, as long as the protest movement is alive and active, then Grand Ayatollah Sistani will feel obliged or obligated to listen to their demands. And while the protest movement is leaderless, I think they have managed to narrow down the list of their asks and demands to very few actionable ones. And I think the most important among them is early elections.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Albert Nikemgan. I'm at the University of Maryland. I'm just surprised that no one so far has mentioned Turkey at all. Turkey has intervened, as you know, in northern Syria, and also is giving refuge for almost 5 million Syrian refugees. Do you see any Turkish role in the events that we've discussed so far?
I can touch on
Go
it
ahead.
a little bit.
Yep.
I'm not a Turkey guy, but I've followed a lot of the Shia militia issues with them. There was almost a kind of quasi-secret war that the Iranians were launching using Shia militias in Iraq and Syria against the Turks for a little while. And this was also with Nubal and Zahra, when there were Shia villages that were surrounded. A lot of things have calmed down between the Turks and the Iranians since that point, since there were like kidnappings of Turkish construction workers that were in Baghdad. It's calmed down since then. And I think it's because the Iranians want to rebuild the connection with the Turks and not have, a bad relationship with that neighbor, given how things are going. But I haven't really seen, major issues from the Shia militias saying, okay, we need to go and target the Turks again. It's a different situation in Syria now than it has been the past couple of years. And because of that, the Iranians just say, okay, you guys are doing your own thing. You're letting us do our thing. That's fine.
I invite you to watch the event that we had last week, in which we covered Turkey's role inside Turkey. We looked at domestic politics, but we also looked at what Turkey does outside of its borders, more focusing on Syria, but we also went all the way to Libya. Any other questions? Yes, sir, in the back.
Is this on? Oh.
Yep.
Hi, Aaron Manis, Homeland Security. So in a previous life as an academic, I looked at the decapitation of terrorist groups as a strategy. And overall, the academic literature is sort of like, sometimes, maybe, I don't know. So I'm just sort of curious, what might make the Soleimani case different or the same? What is an indicator? I'm interested in building that literature out. When is this effective? What is this a case study of?
Mike, I think.
Yeah, so, our succession series at the Institute, has had some foundational concepts behind it. One of them is where in the arc of a leader's career does that leader disappear, however it is, natural causes, whatever. So that's one way to look at it. What more did those people have to achieve? Now, when we took Mohandes and Soleimani out, they may well have deserved their deaths for all of the terrorist violence that they'd unleashed. But I don't think that's what we were killing. We weren't killing people whose future contribution would be more terrorist attacks, honestly. What we were dealing with were people who were building terrorist states, in a sense, a shadow state within Iraq, a broader axis of resistance across the region. This is not just removing a guy who is shuffling resources around from one bunch of little vilayets to another. These are the people who were administering an empire that was going to stretch from the Mediterranean to the Afghan border. These were soldier statesmen that we took out of the picture. So I don't know if they necessarily fit into the same literature as typical terrorist decapitation type stuff, because I think they had really transcended to a much higher level of statesmanship and literally state building. I mean, the attempt to build a transnational state that spanned a whole bunch of places, and not some Mickey Mouse thing like ISIS, but a real one.
Okay, I have time for one more question. Yes, the front row.
Hi, Grace Huang from CSIS. So, broad question for all the panelists. Do you have any recommendations for a long-term U.S. strategy in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon? And then, furthermore, for Dr. Knights, after the killing of Soleimani, do you think that we're going to see more tit-for-tat retaliatory attacks, or do you think Iran will retaliate in a larger sense? Thank you.
Okay, now, thank you. You asked the question that I asked them all. So now you get a chance to bring this all home to U.S. policy. How can, given your analysis in these three countries, what's the lesson here? What are the challenges and opportunities, to use those two words again, for U.S. policy in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq? So let's start with Haneen.
All right, thanks. I think under the umbrella of maximum pressure campaign that has been targeting Iran per se, but has definitely weakened Hezbollah in terms of finances. So in that sense, use the opportunities of Hezbollah's finances in Lebanon and continue the if it's going to be only like a sanctions policy or a sanctions approach, and we're not going to do more about it, then definitely there are different and more effective ways of doing it. Like one, Hezbollah's economy is a cash economy. Sanctions do hurt Hezbollah, but it's more the sanctions in Iran that is hurting Hezbollah. But going after Hezbollah in Lebanon, containing Hezbollah in Lebanon politically, they cannot function without their allies. So this is something to think about now, and especially when the protests in the streets are calling for anti-corruption and anti-corruption and reforms. I think today it's very interesting. My colleague Matt and I just published a piece about this 2 days ago about the use of Magnitsky Act in order to go after corrupt politicians and government people who are today the core of the street protest, and also empower and enable Hezbollah's access to state institutions. This is one under like the current policy. But also definitely if Hezbollah today in Lebanon is gaining power, and more power, is because they have always learned to use the formula and present the formula of stability versus status quo. And today they're doing the same. They're saying, we are going to form this government and confront everybody with 100% Hezbollah government. And again, we're going to use it in order to offer the same formula of stability versus the status quo. So the question today for the international community is the international community going to bail out Lebanon and legitimize Hezbollah's government or not? This is the main question when it comes to Lebanon and Hezbollah's power in Lebanon. If this government, which we all know cannot do substantial reforms, is going to be bailed out for the sake of stability, then Hezbollah in Lebanon will be legitimized and they will continue. This is an opportunity that will not be repeated. If not, then yes, the economy will collapse, the state will collapse, the system will collapse, and there will be humanitarian issues, humanitarian crises, etc. But the people in the street are okay with that. They want to hit bottom in order to rebuild, and not to legitimize this government. The moment this government was formed, the people went to the street in large numbers to express disagreement with the current government. So I think the international community should consider this very seriously. Hezbollah cannot guarantee stability or instability. They are using the same formula. So no bailout should happen under this government, under the system. And again, like in Iraq, the street is very clear indication of that. So this is something else that I would recommend. There are others, but I'm not going to go into the details.
Philip? Thanks, Hani.
So for Syria, I view it as the perfect place to blunt the spear point for the Iranians. This can be, you can use covert methods for it. You can be a little bit more overt. I think the Israelis are demonstrative in this too, because they'll just kind of hit whatever they want there, and we haven't seen much of a response now, have we? But I look at it that way. Sadly, it's kind of a nether region now, where the Iranians will send lots and lots of foot soldiers and lots of nasty people. If they get killed there, yeah, they might get a martyrdom ceremony, but it's not the same as killing a bunch of them in Iraq or killing a bunch of their proxies, let's say, in Lebanon. It's a different realm. And I think because it's such a major node within what they want to do, it kind of makes it imperative on the United States to say, okay, well, you can't have that. Now, again, it's harder now than it was a little while ago, because how many allies do we have on the ground and who's willing to do things? It might have to be more of a direct response if the United States ever does anything there, but it's a better place to execute it. I think this even ties in with future sanctions too. If we look at the new organizations that were built by Lebanese Hezbollah, by Asayb al-Haq, by Kataib Hezbollah, all of them registered terrorist organizations. Barbara, you look really upset. I don't know what's going on. But if you look at all of these organizations, these groups are all tied in with one another. They are interlinked. And when we are sanctioning things, we should look at that further, at how interlinked these networks are, how there's overlapping modes of control, and we should sanction accordingly. If we're talking about some of these little Hezbollah-light groups that were near Qusayr that were being formed, they listen to Hezbollah's command. Sometimes they're registered as Lebanese Hezbollah martyrs. So why aren't they being listed as well? Why aren't they being taken care of in terms of sanctioning things? And this is kind of low-hanging fruit, though. I mean, everybody knows that they're with Hezbollah. So,
Mike, you get the last word.
All right, so there's three things we need to do for Iraq strategy. They all sound really easy. You know, you're going to write 25 pages on each of them, you know, and we have done, and we will continue to. But here's the shorthand. First, in Iraq, you identify and you support your friends. This is something this administration is a bit better at than some, and I hope that continues in the future. In other words, you know, we identify, we look at the demonstrators, we look at the next generation, you know, who've done nothing wrong and don't deserve this kind of repression. We look at positive actors in the Iraqi political sphere, what you would call the Iraq first actors, those who put Iraq first. And then we identify some new generation Iraqi leaders, and there are many of them coming up for a track 2 effort. You give these people attention, you listen to them, you interact with them regularly, you don't let things slide when they get attacked, and you provide some degree of deterrence and protection for them insofar as you can, and that includes, of course, our own coalition partners and our own troops in the country. So, you know, you support forces and you deter attacks on them. How do you do that? Second, you levy exemplary threats and actual punishments against the people who deserve it. You know, what we've got in Iraq right now is a negative, corrupt, Iranian-influenced elite that is trying to defend itself against the rest of the country. And, you know, ultimately we need to keep this elite under pressure. And we know where their money is, and we know where their houses are, and we know pretty much everything you need to know about them, and what we don't know we can find out very, very quickly, and all their enemies will tell us. And we're starting to begin to weaponize that information. And every time, you know, there's a GLOMAG package coming up or some other kind of sanctions package, you feel the tremor go through the entire system. And you see who's got money that's vulnerable, and you see who's worried about getting sanctioned. The third thing we need to do is to negotiate a sustainable security framework, security cooperation framework with Iraq. This should not be too hard, ultimately. The hard part is making it safe for our forces. That's the bit that the Iraqis didn't do. And they need to do it, you know, because we can't stay and we can't operate, we can't be effective under these conditions. But, you know, if we provide a less, I think we're going to end up putting in a less kinetic, less combat-focused mission. Iraq right now has got 81 countries in the coalition supporting it, you know, nearly 24, you know, operating in country in one shape or another. You know, it's got the majority of the G20 states on its side. That means every year foreign ministers, defense ministers, prime ministers, presidents, speakers of parliament, MPs, generals are all coming through Iraq. I did the metrics on this. Before the coalition existed, nobody cared about Iraq at all. And they won't care about Iraq at all after the coalition is gone. The Iraqis seem to think the Chinese will fill the entire gap. They won't fill the entire gap. And when they do, there will be a price. There will be a commercial price, which is that everything will cost way more than it was bid, and there will be a political price. They will own you as if you were a third world country. So, you know, those are the three things we need to do. On the final thing about retaliation, you know, I would never say the Iranians are not going to retaliate, because they could be retaliating right now. Yeah. And they will retaliate. There's no doubt. Whether their retaliation will be that consequential is a different matter. You know, the fact is, they're always retaliating for something against us in Iraq or across the region. Retaliation is what we get all the time. And, you know, we're in this cycle with them until it gets broken one way or the other. You know, and I hope it gets broken peacefully. And I could imagine in something like 2021, there'd be a pretty good potential for rebuilding a deal with the Iranians once we get through our elections and once they get through theirs. You know, I think within that kind of time frame, if they can hang on and not do something crazy, then there's probably pretty good likelihood that either US president that comes in is going to explore a deal have more interest in a deal, and the Iranians are going to know whoever it is has either got 4 or 8 years to run, and you can actually make a deal with this person, you know, potentially with Congress on their side as well. So, you know, we all need to stay calm for the next year.
This
and
is
it
a
won't
very...
be us. The thing is this, it won't be us who starts it. Seriously.
It's a very rare moment, definitely for me, to end a panel on the Middle East with an optimistic note, but I'll take it. Thank you so much for being here. Please join me in thanking this all-star panel. And thank you for being here as well. Thanks, mate.